Hey everyone, welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be hiking the Fox Canyon, Foothill, and Luci trails at the Ojai Valley View Nature Reserve. The 195-acre, very mountainous Ojai Valley View Nature Preserve includes the main attraction Shelf Road Trail, as well as many side trails which I hiked today in this video. The three trails that I hiked today are much longer, steeper, and more difficult than the main Shelf Road Trail. The main Shelf Road Trail is only 2.5 miles long, while the loop of trails that I hiked today is about 3 to 4 miles long, as I don't know the exact distance. After driving to the end of North Signal Street, there's access in the entrance to the Valley View Preserve. I actually came here intending to hike the Shelf Road Trail, and I only hiked these other trails because of my inexperience with the area, as well as my choice not to review the map before starting on the trailhead. So basically I only hiked these trails because I got lost at this trailhead and I didn't know which trail was which, so I accidentally hiked Fox Canyon Trail at the beginning instead of entering onto Shelf Road. Even though I didn't get to hike the trail that I originally went there for, I still enjoyed this hike even though it was far more difficult and steep than I expected. The video that you're currently seeing is right after entering the preserve before you reach any trailheads, which is after about 10 minutes of walking along this road. Access to the Fox Canyon Trail is directly at the end of this road, but if you want to start hiking the Luci Trail or the Shelf Road Trail, you'll need to walk about 10 minutes to the right from the end of this road. On this road, about halfway between the end of North Signal Street and access to the Fox Canyon Trail, there were some orchards to see as well. The orchards are private property, so you can't enter, but you can see some avocado trees inside from here. You can park for this preserve anywhere along the end of North Signal Street as long as you don't go in an area reserved for resident parking. After about 10 minutes of walking along that short dirt road, you have the official entrance of the Ojai Valley View Preserve. This is at the end of the dirt road where there's access to the Fox Canyon Trail as well as information on the preserve, and if you go right from here, you'll have access to other trails and Shelf Road. This is the information for the Ojai Valley View Preserve and for the trail. There isn't a map on this board, but you can take a map here if you want. Right after you pass the entrance there with the information, you start an incline straight up this part of the mountain, just about 2 or 3 minutes into the trail. There's no camping, campfires, or biking allowed here. And there are snakes on this trail, just like most of the other places in Ojai. Here I started my hike by entering Fox Canyon Trail at the main trailhead. This part of the hike seemed like a fairly steep incline at the time, but as I learned after finishing the hike, it definitely is nothing close to what you're going to experience on Luci's trail if you take this loop. And there's already a bit of a view here, which is nice. Fox Canyon Trail is moderately difficult with a gradual incline, but is easier than the other trails that you will take on this loop. The trail just continues looping around this part of the hill right now as it continues gaining elevation. This part of the trail just continues to gain more elevation, which I think the majority of the beginning of this hike will do. And you get more views of Ojai and some orchards and trees below. I'm not totally sure how much elevation this gains, but it just continues to get more narrow and gain elevation as you continue looping around this hill for what seems like the 6th or 5th time. I didn't know at the time, but this trail contains about 850 feet of elevation gain over the duration of your hike. Even in lower elevation areas near the start of the trail, you get very nice panoramic views of Ojai Valley below. This part of the Fox Canyon Trail starts to get narrow with a steep drop on one side and is surrounded by small sandstone formations, brush, and dry vegetation. Even though we're not even close to the top of the trail, what it looks like from here, you can still see a nice view of Ojai and the mountains and even downtown Ojai in the distance there. There are some sandstone formations along the trail here too, which is nice. You have to climb or walk through a few of these rocks here along this part of the trail as you continue gaining elevation. This was one of the less difficult sections of the Fox Canyon Trail without a steep drop on one side and with vegetation and sandstone on both sides. As you continue gaining elevation, the panoramic views of the Ojai Valley only start to get wider and become a very nice photo opportunity on this hike. There are also some nice rock formations along this part of the trail, which will be nice as a photo opportunity if you stop here. This point about halfway through the part of the Fox Canyon Trail that I hiked is also a nice place to stop and rest under a few trees and rocks. It looks like this trail is starting to loop back around to the entrance down that hill, but I'm not totally sure yet. Right before you start making your way back along the loop too, there's a rock here with some flat area that is a good place to sit and rest and take a break if you want to. And if you walk out a little further from that area, it's still pretty flat here and you get a nice view of Ojai from here. So far, I think this is probably the best point to get a view of Ojai and the mountains and everything below. It's just, it's nice and open here. There's no trees or anything blocking the view, and it's really nice here. This part of the trail went directly along the side of a hill, so it was sloping both upward and downward at different points. And something interesting was this rock looks sort of greenish in person. I'm not sure if it's going to show up on the video or not, but I don't know why that would happen. The trail does get narrower here, and there is a bit of a steep drop, but if you stop here, the view starts to get even wider, and it's really nice view here and photo opportunity. As we start to loop around here back to the entrance, it looks like there's still about half of the length of the trail left. But you can see the trail down there on that mountain cutting through the reddish clay soil. There was poison oak along some parts of the Fox Canyon Trail, so be aware of that. There are a few shade trees along this trail, but there's definitely not a lot of shaded areas unless you get behind a large rock or a tree. So plan on it being sort of hot if you come here on a sunny day. Right here appeared to be the end of the Fox Canyon Trail as we took the Foothill Trail to the right to continue to go downward on the Luci Trail at the end of this. There's another fork in the trail about a few minutes later, and to finish this loop you're going to want to take the right trail, and the left trail leads to somewhere that I did not go today and I'm not exactly sure what it is. At this point there starts to be a sharp drop at the right side of the trail, so if you're afraid of heights, this part may not be great for you, and some of the upcoming parts might not be either. There's a pretty nice view right along this part of the trail. The last part was a bit narrow, but here you're next to a lot of vegetation and it starts to get wider, so it is easier around this part. I noticed these little piles of what looks like either some kind of burnt wood or ash, which might have been from a tree or some kind of plant during the fire that came through here 3 or 4 years ago. There is what looks like it once might have been a creek crossing here, but for now there's only a few small pools of water, and the rest and the part going through the trail have dried out right now. Some green vegetation was near this dried creek, so I'm assuming it was filled with water at some point recently, but it definitely is a seasonal creek. The trail does get pretty narrow around this part, and there are a lot of trees and plants over the trail, so be careful along here. The trail does get pretty narrow around here, but it's not that steep, so it should be okay once you get to the next part. Although that part of the trail might seem steep or narrow, it definitely didn't get any easier as we continued along the trail, and in some points it was even much harder as it started to get rockier as it was going downhill. The trail is narrow here. You can see it, what we just walked through right along the side of that mountain, cut out into the mountain there. It's not as steep as it looks, but it definitely is narrow, so be careful along that part. But it definitely isn't as steep as it looks from here. The trail does go uphill a little bit here, and it definitely is wider than before, but after this point it will probably start going downhill as we're heading back to the entrance. At this point in the trail loop, you will enter Luci's trail, which takes you downhill back to the entrance, but is a very steep decline and is the most difficult part of the hike, with many areas where you need to climb over large rocks. There were a few last panoramic views before you finish the trail going downhill. This is the last of the view, and the trail continues down here through these rocks down. This is the part that you have to come down about halfway down the trail here. It's pretty steep, but as long as you be careful and don't trip over any rocks, it should be fine. This is by far the most difficult trail with a very steep drop on one side, and you have to climb over a very narrow trail with large rocks in it as well as some unstable ground, so it definitely wasn't the most relaxing hike, but it definitely still seems safe and we were able to finish it. As you're starting to come down here, there are also some nice wide views of Ojai, and it's definitely a lot less precarious than the last part of the trail because it starts to get wider here, but it does still looks fairly steep and definitely is a difficult hike at this point. As you can see here, the trail snakes around a few of these hills before starting to head downhill, and it is a very steep decline with, as I said, a lot of rocks and some unstable gravel in the trail. So definitely be careful here and don't be distracted because there's a very steep drop on one side and you need to be careful throughout the entire trail. This part begins to go straight down and it looks a little steep, but the trail is wide, so it probably shouldn't be as hard as the part we just passed. It does get a little steep here and it is a bit breezy, so this part may feel a bit hard, but be careful going down because it still feels a bit steep and difficult here. The trail was still fairly narrow around this point, but it was much wider than the beginning, and there was still a very steep drop on one side, so you still need to be careful to not trip over any rocks or be distracted in any way along this point as it continues the steep downhill. There were still some nice views of Ojai and the valley along this point too. Sections of the trail like shown here had some unstable gravel in the middle, which you should be careful of. About around the halfway point, you can see Shelf Road below, which is a much lower elevation, easier trail that is about 2.5 miles along a wide road. There were some of these abandoned steel structures near the end that looked like they could have been irrigation tanks at some point. Alright, I'm not back to the entrance yet, but we're done with the precarious feeling downhill slope. And the difficult part of the trail seems to be over. There is a bench here where you can sit and take in the view before you leave, and the rest of the way down is fairly wide without any problems with difficulty or being too steep or narrow. As you can see here, the rest of the hike appears to be a pretty consistent, moderately difficult downhill with pretty narrow trails, but I'm not going to be recording anymore here until we get back to the entrance because it's mostly more of the same. I did know what trails I was hiking, but in the next clip I understood after getting to the map how I had gone to the wrong trailhead when I intended to hike Shelf Road. So we got to a map here. I realized that we made a mistake. This is the map of the Ojai Valley View Preserve. So we were planning to go hike here on Shelf Road, which was considered to be an easy hike, and there were no concerns or anything about that. When we got here, I made the mistake of not taking a map, and we actually hiked the wrong trail. We hiked Fox Canyon Trail and connected over here to Foothill Trail and then went down here back to where we are now. So we made this mistake and we hiked the wrong trail, which is actually much more difficult. And I think we might have hiked about 8 miles instead of the planned 2.5, so that took a lot longer than expected. So that is the end of this video for now. Thanks for watching. I'd recommend this hike to anyone who doesn't mind a fairly difficult hike with elevation gain and is not afraid of heights. I'd also recommend this difficult hike to anyone interested in photography, specifically landscape photography of the Ojai Valley, but if you're lucky you may also be able to catch some small animals such as birds and lizards to take photos of along the trail.